Hello, you're listening to Sending the Experts with Georgina Durrant. This podcast is all about teaching and supporting children and young people with special educational needs and disabilities, SEND. My name is Georgina Durrant. I'm the host of this podcast brought to you by Twinkl SEND. As a former teacher in SENDCO myself, I wanted to create a platform to share some of the amazing things that my guests are doing to support learners with SEND. So whether you're listening on your commute, tuning in whilst walking your dog, or curled up on the sofa with a nice cup of coffee, thank you so much for joining us. In this episode, I am absolutely delighted to be joined by the very lovely, very brilliant Adam Sproston. Adam, if you don't know, is Senior His Majesty's Inspector, HMI, for Special Educational Needs and/or Disabilities, Alternative Provision and Inclusion. He is a qualified teacher and has taught across the full primary age range. And before joining Ofsted, Adam gained extensive school improvement and senior leadership experience in primary schools, including specially resourced provisions. He has also worked at local authority level in both early years and SEND strategic leadership. And Adam holds an MPQH and the National Award for SEND Coordination. He leads inspections of primary, special and independent schools. And Adam also leads on and quality assures area SEND inspections. Wow, Adam, we're very lucky to have you on here. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much, Georgina, for that introduction. Great to be here.
Thanks. So I've introduced you a little bit, but I often don't do a good enough job. So I'd love to know more. Can you tell us about your career to date? One thing that our listeners are always wanting to know about is why SEND, why you're so passionate about that. And why did you join Ofsted? Like, how did that happen and what was your journey?
Yeah, brilliant question. I think you've done a great job at selling me there. So thanks for that.
No problem.
So I'm a primary school teacher by trade. So worked in primary schools throughout my career. But then was very interested in working with children with special educational needs and/or disabilities, SEND, particularly because I enjoyed trying to help them, finding solutions, working with the parents, carers and other professionals, and was offered the opportunity to become a SENDCO at the school that I started my career in. So that's where that side of the job started, really. And then I was fortunate enough to teach in reception for many years. I've taught most year groups, and then worked in reception, and that actually opened the doors to me doing some local authority work as well, typically around early years, foundation stage, operation side of that, offering support and challenge to some other schools. So that worked incredibly well, and typically that was around supporting children with emerging SEND. In the early years, speech language communication needs, and then I became interested in young people that have autism, and I've worked in resource provision, but also worked in settings that support those children across the whole age range, really, from nursery up to secondary and post 16, working just to support children in how they're being helped. Did a brief stint working for the DFE before I started my teaching career, actually. So that was interesting as a civil servant. And then in my teaching career, as I moved through leadership, I worked in 2 local authorities who had received an area SEND inspection and had a few things to sort out as a result of that, and got involved in sorting and helping them mostly with sufficiency, mostly thinking about area-wide graduated approach, for example, Georgina, different pathways and things, and just giving a teacher's insight into how it might feel for children and young people. And then I saw a job come up at Ofsted, got interested in, well, maybe I could do one of those area SEND inspections, and the rest is history, really. And you asked why children and young people with SEND and career in Ofsted, and it's just all about trying to do the best for those children and their families, really, and try and eke a little bit more positivity and change where we can. Wow. So that's just a summary of me, really. So thanks so much for the opportunity to talk through that with your listeners.
Brilliant. And you come across as a real problem solver and real positive sort of change maker, which is lovely, Adam.
Yeah. Got to be glass half full, haven't we? And really committed to identifying those positives as well in the system.
Yeah, no, brilliant. So the thing that people will be wanting to know about, as we know, is the new framework. It was proposed back in February, and then I think in September it was confirmed that there'd be this new Ofsted framework. And I believe it's due to be rolled out in November. So on the 10th of November, is that correct, Adam? Have I got
It
the
is,
dates
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Good. So are you able to tell us about this renewed framework? And in particular, unsurprisingly, I'd like to know about the enhanced focused on inclusion and how this will work, please.
Yeah, of course. So we're now in a phase of increased engagement. So part of why I'm speaking to you today, doing the podcast and engaging with other colleagues as well. And there is an enhanced focus on inclusion, and we'll talk about that. So it's a renewed education inspection framework. Really importantly, that is for early years providers. That's for state funded schools, non-association independent schools, post-16 provision, further education and skills, and also initial teacher education.
Brilliant.
And you've mentioned 10th of November.
Yeah.
That's when we're rolling things out for early years, state-funded schools, and for FES, further education and skills. Non-association independent schools and ITE are going to come from January. But you
Okay.
can read everything online. There's operating guides that you and your colleagues and friends can download and look through at your leisure. And the aim of the toolkits is to exemplify and to show the sector in a transparent way what we'll be looking for and how we'll be doing that on inspection. Importantly, there is an enhanced focus. A lot of people say to me, "Oh, why are you looking at inclusion now, Adam?" Well, we always did look at elements of inclusion, always did. For example, be that how well children are kept safe and input with social care agencies and everything that comes under the umbrella of safeguarding. You could call that inclusion, to how well teachers adapt approaches in classrooms for all children, but especially for those that have SEND. So there's just an enhanced focus on that now, because there's going to be a separate evaluation area that will result in a grade for the provider that we're inspecting at that time. Really importantly, I know that the podcast is sending the experts, but there's more groups than just those children with SEND that we want to look at. But for the audience today,
I appreciate that.
I will stack up that group a little bit more for you. But actually, what we've put throughout all of the evaluation areas, be that curriculum and teaching, behaviour, when we focus on that, is 4 broad groups. And 3 of them are those children that we know typically need the most support and don't always do as well as we think that they should. And that is disadvantaged children. So in the school space, that would typically be those who are eligible for free school meals or one of the pupil premium grants. It's children and young people with SEND. So we know that things need to improve for those young people as well, and they face barriers, but also children that have social care input or who have been known to children's social care. So that could be those at a statutory level of support with a social worker, maybe child in need, child protection, but also looked after children, and the support that those children are getting, or those that have been previously looked after. So care leavers, for example, key focus as well. And they're peppered throughout all of the toolkits, but are also a key indicator around that inclusion grade. And that's really important because a lot of your audience might be SENDCOs. And of course, we still want to hear from SENDCOs on inspection, and they're a vital part of the leadership of a school. But actually, that it might be wider than the SENDCO now. So what we're finding at the moment, we're doing end-to-end visits, pilots, to further look at our processes of what we've published. And actually, we're finding that leaders, and we'll work closely with leaders about who's going to be in which meeting, but they might bring in the colleague that has an oversight of children in care, for example, or they might bring in the leader for the pupil premium strategy, just to give a bit more depth and nuance. And there's definite interplay and layering there, isn't there? You know, with those children who are disadvantaged and face barriers.
Yeah.
Now, the other group that's really important that we're going to focus on is children and young people who may face other barriers to their
Okay.
learning or well-being.
Yep.
And that might be children that are at an emerging level of the graduated approach, I
Yep.
suppose, that aren't quite SEN support yet, but
Yep.
that leaders
On the radar. Sort of, yeah.
exactly on the radar. We hear all sorts, so watch list,
Yeah.
or cause for concern. Some colleagues may call it for whatever reason. But actually, that's absolutely essential, because at the heart of what we're doing is working with leaders to understand their context.
Yeah.
I get a lot of emails, I have done, about, well, Adam, what is this list of children? And actually, that's for providers to think about. But I can
Yeah.
give you
I like
and your
that.
listeners some typicality, and it might be children that we've welcomed into the country who are asylum seeking, and their families may be refugees, and they might not get social care input. They
Mm.
might have English as an additional language, but actually the teachers are waiting to see how well those children flourish with early transition. So they're not quite SEND, they might
Yeah.
be, but they're seeing how they go. But we want to think about the challenges those children and their families face, but also what support they're receiving. And another huge group would be young carers,
Brilliant.
Georgina, in
Really
that
important.
exactly in that forum there. And some may have some social care input,
Yeah.
others may not quite have reached the threshold or may not have SEND.
Yeah.
But actually, we're working with those providers to think carefully about what they're doing.
What I like about
Um,
this broadness, Adam, as well, it's very nature, it's inclusive, which is
exactly.
fabulous. Yeah.
Exactly, and trying to work with the provider on what's going in place. And really importantly, throughout the toolkit, we've not said remove the barriers. We've
Yeah.
said, acting to reduce those barriers,
Yeah.
because we understand schools are only one part of the solution, and it's how they're signposting, working with parents and carers and professionals, for example.
Yeah.
So hopefully that's given you a good
It
overview
has.
initially.
No, that's really helpful. And you mentioned about parents, and we do have listeners, obviously, that are parents and carers of children with special education needs and disabilities. I think that side of this podcast audience has started to grow, which is exciting. And they'll be watching and listening to this in a different perspective, because they're thinking of their children. And I suppose they'll be wanting to know if this change in the way Ofsted will be inspecting, if it's going to mean that their child will receive, if it will help to ensure and reassure them that their child's going to receive that sort of high quality support in schools. And I wonder if you could help reassure them a little bit.
Yeah, of course. So we've always been focused on children with SEN, but what in particular the shift is here, there's that inclusion grade. So of course, children with SEN, disadvantaged children, those groups that I mentioned previously are at the heart of that. But they're also importantly included in the other evaluation areas.
Mm-hmm.
So an example of that for your listeners might be attendance and behaviour.
Yeah.
And in that toolkit area, we're seeking to understand the approaches that that leaders are putting into place to support children's attendance and improve that over time.
Mm-hmm.
Over time's really important
Yeah.
there as well. And the same for approaches to behaviour.
Yeah.
So working in a collaborative way with teachers and leaders, what's in place for most children, is that different for Adam? Why is that approach slightly different? What's the impact, and how you're checking that over time and working with
That.
parents and carers?
I think they're
So
going to find
those,
super reassuring, that bit, because I know lots of people are concerned around behaviour and around
yeah,
attendance and how it can be flexible for children with SEND and like their needs. And I think that's lovely to hear that.
exactly. And we're committed to maintaining high standards
Yeah.
there, and you can have high standards, high expectations, and also be inclusive and
Yeah.
welcoming to children and young people. I think if I pick up a little bit about what that'll look
Yeah,
like on the
that'd be really
ground,
helpful.
actually, because there will be a parent and carer survey.
Okay.
So parents and carers are always encouraged to
Yeah.
fill that in, and that gives inspectors another piece of homogenous data, I suppose, that
Yeah.
comes together for us to tease out. But at the start of the day, you'll find inspectors out and about, seeing how children are welcomed into schools, and in special schools that might be the taxi procedures and how that happens.
Which is really
In a
important.
primary, that might be out on the yard, speaking
The
to
chaos of
parents
the
and
morning at
carers.
drop-off.
Exactly, yeah, and working and speaking to parents at the start of the inspection
Yeah.
as well, to gather their views.
Oh, I love that. You've seen the whole school day that way.
Exactly.
I should mention that I had when I first started my career, Adam. And I haven't actually told you this, Adam, because I do know Adam. But I haven't told him this. When I first started my career, the first school I started working in went into special measures. Literally a few weeks after I started my job, it wasn't all my fault, but we went into special measures, and I literally had an Ofsted inspector in my classroom. I think I saw Ofsted more than I did my mentor when I was at NQT. So yeah, I just wanted to
Good
put it out there.
experience of us.
Very good, very thorough experience of Ofsted. I actually felt, to be fair, I think it was different having been a new teacher, but I did feel it was actually a really good experience for me from a professional development point of view, because it was we had a lot of support
Yeah.
in back then. It was really useful.
And
Anyway,
that's what we're focusing on really as well. So like celebrating the achievements of the school,
uh,
a lot more walking and talking with senior leaders as well, and working with them. Is that what you'd expected for us to have seen? Because
yeah,
in inspection, is point in time.
yeah,
So we're trying to use what we see to work out what's typical for,
yeah,
for children at the school, and lots of the tools will still be there. We're not doing deep dives anymore, but we're still
yeah,
going to be speaking to teachers, visiting lessons. Importantly, the best part of the day, speaking to children as well about
yeah,
their
absolutely.
experiences.
Oh no, that's brilliant. So with the inspections being when this goes out, this episode goes out in November. So our listeners, I can say this has been the inspections have been rolled out this month.
Right.
What will an enhanced focus on inclusion look like during an inspection? So if the teachers listening now are thinking, how different is it going to look if they've had an Ofsted inspection previously, or leaders, if it's SENDCO listening, for example, what will it be like day to day when you come in? What can they expect, and how different will
Yeah.
that be to previous ones?
Great question. We've published an operating guide that will talk colleagues in the sector through what they can expect.
Yep.
What we're going to be doing, that lays out typical activities that will take place on day one and day
Yep.
two. Vitally important, safeguarding still top priority,
Good.
and that will be an early on day one meeting with the DSL and colleagues to think about when children may need to have been escalated, and how timely and effective that has been, but also checking that single central record, which is vitally important. And we do that early on day one, because if are any concerns that are raised, we can highlight those to leaders, and they can provide additional evidence early
Yeah,
doors.
that makes sense.
Yeah, most of the activities that I mentioned are going to continue, but we'll be out and about. That's a big difference. So early on, walking with leaders to get a feel for the school, to see those early moments and interactions between staff and children.
Yeah.
And there will be a focus on inclusion, because what we're doing is something called case sampling. And
Hmm.
that's really important that we call it case sampling and not case studies,
Yeah.
because what we want to do is work with school leaders, select a broad range of children, and then when we're on our learning walks, seek to explore what all the aspects of school life are like for that child as a focus lens, but widening that out to the peers they're sat with on the table,
Yeah.
other people that they're walking into school with, to find out again similarities and differences, and why that might be. So we're going to be doing case sampling. That is a change, and we'll work with the provider to choose a broad range of children, because we want, if we put children at the heart of what we do,
Yeah.
that's what we stand for, finding out what things are like for children and young people. I think typically the activities are very similar. We'll be going into some lessons, we'll be speaking to staff, seeing what the school looks and feels like, but we
Yeah.
want to make sure the look and feel of inspection is different too.
Yeah.
So we from the notification call, we really want to find out about the context of the school,
Mm-hmm.
what have leaders been working on and why.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so
yeah.
that might actually change the depth to which we focus on some elements on inspection.
Yes.
Because, if leaders say to us, we've only just introduced a phonics scheme, we'd really like you looking at that, in particular our interventions for this, that and the other, because we've acknowledged this, Adam. So there's going to be some flex in terms of the flavour of the day, but
Yeah.
those typical things will still be present and similar to what colleagues have expected
Yeah, so it's
previously.
not going to be a completely different experience really then on
Not
the ground.
not at all, not at all. What there's more of is more reflective moments.
Yeah.
So with those senior leaders talking about and building the picture as the inspection goes, open dialogue and discussion,
Yeah.
and like I say, those chances to celebrate what the school have been working on, but also our jobs to highlight where things can be improved for children.
Yeah, brilliant. And you mentioned context, which I think is really, really important.
Yeah,
And I want you to touch on that a little bit more if I could, because there's going to be the schools listening that will be thinking, well, I've got a really high proportion of SEND children with SEND in my school. There might be schools thinking we don't have very many. Yeah, how will school context be taken into account on inspection then?
Yeah, great question. So we've committed to looking more closely at a school's context,
Yeah.
and we will do that as a starting point through data that's provided.
Okay.
So your colleagues will know about the IDSR that's available, other publicly available data such as validated performance measures, and we'll use those as a starting point and are likely to unpick them straight away on that call with the head teacher. But the problem with data, particularly with young people with SEND, children are all very unique.
Yeah.
So we can't capture everything.
No.
We can capture broad numbers of children and young people with SEND and their main need. But the other bit of data that we will gather is speaking to leaders on that initial call,
Yeah.
but also throughout the inspection. And that's really important because while we might see percentages of children with SEND, at times we don't know what classes those children are
Yes.
in. We don't know the severity of their needs. For example, you can see the broad areas are highlighted on the
Yeah.
census. So speech, language, and communication needs.
Mhm.
We don't know whether that's a young person who needs support with their social
Yeah, it's so
interaction.
broad. It's speech language
Yeah,
communication is so broad, it captures so much, doesn't it? That it's going to be completely
exactly.
different for, and we know,
Or if
like you
it
say, all children are unique, but in terms of speech and language, it's such a broad umbrella. I'm just thinking there's so many
exactly.
different needs within that.
So we'll work with providers to work out that about
Yeah.
children and to discuss that with them. But context also is local context
Yeah.
as well. So we've got information on deprivation, but
Yeah.
of course, in particular in special schools, children might be not coming from where the school is based.
Yeah.
They might be getting a taxi in, and they may face different barriers if they're from a different part of the town or city, for example, and want
Yeah.
to explore that. There's things we don't know until we call.
Yeah.
So, challenges the school may have faced recently in the community.
Yeah.
Um, Maybe, I don't know, there's increased risks to children. Maybe there's gang or knife crime. And
Yeah.
what will the approach be to the main school?
Yeah.
Is there a different approach for children with SEND, and why might that be?
Yeah,
And
like you say, the
exploring
data
that.
can only tell you so much, can't it? And
Exactly.
that as a former teacher and a former SENCO, that yeah, you've got to be in there and talking to the staff and talking to their children before you get the full
Exactly.
picture of what's actually going on. I think a lot of people
Really
will be really
important.
reassured by that, Adam, because it does show like the officer listening, that they're taking, I mean, that yeah,
Yeah.
taking more of
Yeah.
the context and having that flex around it. I think is really important.
Yeah.
Thank
And I
you.
think actually it's so important that it's that there's no data doesn't mean that there's excuses not to meet
Yeah,
children's needs, for example, but we can work in partnership about the challenges that does put um, on schools. But ultimately, we do want to find out what schools are doing about certain challenges and why, and what impact they've seen. If it's not worked for you, Georgina, but it has worked for Adam, why is that? What they're doing about it? And are governors, senior leaders, and class teachers aware of the battle plan, really?
Yeah, no, that's really important. And my last question for you, Adam, and you've been brilliant, by the way. Thank you so much for being so
Very
open
well.
about stuff. I really do appreciate it. So just sort of Ofsted's wider work regarding children and young people with SEND, if there's anything else you wanted to share with us, our listeners will be very interested by this episode. I think the word Ofsted in the title is just going to get lots of listens because people will be wanting to know as much as they can. So, yeah, anything else you're able to tell us about your wider work would be great.
Yeah, great question, actually. And before, I'll be honest about this, when I worked as a teacher, I just thought Ofsted was schools.
Yeah, well, you
Ofsted,
do,
Ofsted,
don't you? You think about what actually
exactly.
happens to you, and yeah, like I say, them being in my classroom all the time. That's what I thought they did, and that was
Yeah,
it.
all those, or the down the road now will be
Yeah,
next.
yeah. Oh gosh,
All those kind of myths as
brings back
well.
memories.
So working for Ofsted's a great privilege, but actually there's huge teams here that focus on other aspects of our work, and ultimately we're about making lives better for children, young people and their families.
Yeah.
And for example, we've got a huge number of colleagues that work in social care, that are working with children's homes, checking that children are safe every day. But we've got other frameworks that also look at things in a slightly different way. So of course, school inspections are looking at those children at the school at the time, building a picture of what their experiences are like. We've got colleagues that are going into nurseries, childminders that are doing the same.
Yeah.
We've got colleagues that are going into huge colleges with thousands of children and are working with leaders in the same way to work out what things are like for children and young people there. But another aspect, you mentioned it in the introduction, thank you, is around area send.
Yeah.
So looking at children with send at a partnership level.
Mm-hmm.
So when we say partnership, we're talking about those leaders that work in a council footprint.
Yeah.
Might be a bit overlaid with health services as well, and
Yeah.
how well health, social care work together to support
Brilliant.
children through education. And actually, we do lots of research in Ofsted as well. We've got a huge research team here. Part of our work under Area Send at the moment is we've just concluded some visits, we call them thematic visits, to partnership areas, looking about the theme, which was children with SEND that are not in school.
Okay. Yeah.
And that's been fascinating, and
Yeah.
lots of information that will be published on that in December.
Okay.
Exploring those push factors, but
Yeah.
also pull factors
Mm-hmm.
as to why children with SEND aren't in school, finding out a little bit about sufficiency in the sector,
Yeah.
dissatisfaction, but also some real positive stories about how children are supported to get either a different education
Yeah.
that meets their needs well, or getting children back into mainstream education to
Yeah.
value, to gain more from school than is just qualifications, learning about career opportunities, personal, social, emotional, health and well-being, and making friends as well. So lots of thematic work going on,
Yeah, that's
and your
really
listeners can
interesting.
find out about the past ones we've done. So we've done them on alternative provision,
Yes.
and put some recommendations forward, and seen huge changes
Good.
in the sector because of that, but also preparation for adulthood,
Yeah.
which is a huge, huge worry for many parents,
Yeah.
carers, and children themselves about what comes when I'm
Yeah.
16.
Yeah.
What about when I'm 18 and above? And have laid out some good recommendations there as well that we hope will do a bit of good as we go.
Fantastic. That's really interesting. I'm looking forward to that report out in December as well. That would be fascinating. We might have to get you back on
Fantastic.
here, Adam.
Oh, we'll get me or one of my colleagues on to talk to you about that. Definitely.
Yeah,
That'll
no,
be
that would be
brilliant.
really interesting because no, I'd be fascinated to know what you found out from that because it is a big area, and we know, with lack of specialist setting places, but also other things around lack of flexibility in schools. There are a lot of, and like you say, pull reasons as well. I'm sure, not just push, but it'd be really interesting to find out the reasons behind why some children aren't able to attend school at the moment. So yeah, that'd be fascinating as well. But thank you, really appreciate your time, Adam. You've been a brilliant guest. Thank you so much for sharing so much about Ofsted and the new framework. I think it'd be very, very useful to our listeners, and I'm very, very grateful. Thank you.
Thanks so much for the invitation.